Howdy, this is Matt from Covenanter Homestead. I want to talk a little bit today about what we do here when we are smack dab in the dog days of summer. We had a really cool spring, so our plants kind of got off to a slow start as it was and kind of stagnated. And then by mid to late May, really the beginning of June, really, it was pretty cool up until June. Then the typical East Texas summer heat set in, and it's at that point that most of our plants, they just can't keep up. As you can see, we're kind of in the process of converting to the Back to Eden garden. We sheet mulched with cardboard, and then we put layers of mulch that we got from the city dump, and we'll continue to do that each and every year to build up the soil and the organic matter. And of course we add compost as we can. We also kind of got behind the eight ball this fall because I had shoulder surgery in September, so I wasn't able to prep the garden like I had hoped with compost and fertilizer and so forth. So that really didn't get the plants off to too much of a good start as it was. So hopefully we'll get everything back to the way it was next year. We'll spend the winter time mulching and fertilizing, and that should help the spring garden next year. But around here, you really have to plan on getting most of your crops in early. That's why we start them in the greenhouse in early January, so that we can get them in the ground just as soon as we can. Otherwise, when this heat hits, everything just stops growing, and like I said, you really can't water it enough to keep it going. It just gets so hot and so humid. But the thing I want to talk about today particularly is our tomatoes. And as I said, the tomatoes didn't do as well this year as they did last year because of the cool nights we had for so long and the relatively cool days. And that made them grow really slowly. And now the heat is just so intense that they're dying and they're shriveling up, and the tomatoes are taking forever to ripen. So what I like to do at this time of year is radically prune them. After they've grown for a pretty good while and they get a good root system, if you prune them way back, they're able to survive throughout the summer because they have a big root system with small vegetation. If you come over this way, here we had a pot with nothing in it, so we put some Mexico midget cherry tomatoes in. Cherry tomatoes tend to do really well in this part of Texas. Your larger, what they call beefsteak tomatoes and things like that, it's kind of hit or miss a lot of times, but usually the cherry tomatoes will do well. Again, this year they're not doing as great as they did last year, but we figured we can keep them alive through the summer. I did this last year, and usually in the fall they'll start to take off again, and you can get one more really good crop of tomatoes before winter sets in. So if you'll come closer. So what I like to do is I'll radically prune these tomato plants back. You have to leave some leaves, obviously, for them to be able to conduct photosynthesis to continue staying alive and growing. But just cut back as far as you can, leaving one leaf or so on each branch, and then they don't require as much water that way because they have less vegetation, and the root systems are deep and wide, and so it doesn't take much to support the plant when you have this few leaves. And they're not pushing out any fruit right now, obviously, so that the plant doesn't require or expend as much energy trying to ripen the fruit on the plant. So this is what I like to do, and this is the Mexico midget cherry tomato, as I said. And we'll walk over here, I'll show you our larger tomatoes, and you can kind of get a glimpse of how everything else is doing. It's the first year our grapevine's doing somewhat well. The birds like to pick us dry before they can really get a chance to ripen too much, but I thought this vine was all but dead a couple years ago, but something I've learned is that you never give up on anything, and they surprise you. They'll come back when you least expect it. So we cut it way back, just like we did the tomatoes. And this is all growth within the last 2 seasons, I believe. It had grown like this, and I cut it all the way back to about 2 inches above the ground, and it grew back. can see our sweet potatoes are doing pretty well, but even in this time of day, everything was wilting. Our zucchini did not do well. It usually does very well for us, but it's not. The cucumbers are kind of meeting the end of their life expectancy. But over here is where I have my favorite variety of larger tomatoes. It's called the black Krim. I usually don't like to eat tomatoes just by themselves, but I could eat these tomatoes by themselves anytime. They're delicious and they're big and they're deep purple or black. But you can see I cut these way back as well. Some of these have some tomatoes on them, so I haven't cut them all the way back. But this is the nearest leaf, so I had to leave this one kind of long. I went ahead and cut all these back and left this one. And the same with some of these other ones. This one I cut radically back. I cut all of this off except for this one little branch here. And you can see this is looking pretty good actually. It's got deep green and it looks succulent. It's retaining the water well because it has such a large root system now for this small plant. And once I get the fruit from these other big ones, you can see that there's a few tomatoes on there. Once they ripen and I take those off, I'll probably prune those back a great deal more as well. And then in the fall, these will start to come back and they'll get large just like they do in the spring, and you'll get another crop of tomatoes, and it'll be easier for them then because they have a well-established root system, and it'll be much cooler during the fall as well. And that's all I got today. Until next time.